Conflict of Interest Act, and I'd like to welcome our first witness for today from the Privy Council office, Mr. Michael Sabia, who's the clerk of the Privy Council and secretary to the Cabinet. Mr. Sabia, welcome to the committee. Before we begin, I just want to remind you, sir, make sure that you have your earpiece on for interpretation if you need it, because we just don't want any delays in the interpretation. So I'm saying that this committee, historically, since this session has started, has been a Francophone committee. So I'm just want to make sure that you're clear on that. I know you've also asked Mr. Sabia for up to 8 minutes to address the committee. I'm going to grant that, and I invite you to start now. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Merci bien, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
Invitation.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Mr. President, members of the committee, I think we all know that democracies really around the world are under pressure from lots of different sources: social media, disinformation, globalization, string of health and financial crises, and all of this contributes to that pressure. That being said, from organizations like the OECD to not-for-profit organizations like Freedom House, according to them, Canada, relative to the rest of the world, in terms of the quality of our democracy, is doing very well. Now, why is that? I guess there are many reasons for that, but at least in part, it is the result of a deep-rooted culture of integrity that we are lucky to have here in Canada, integrity of public office holders, and, of course, of the public service. That culture of integrity is the basis on which strong democracies are built, and in my view, that's Canada. So while culture is hard to measure, as we all know, we do see proof of it, proof of this fact about the quality of Canadian democracy everywhere, in our rules, in our laws, in our processes. For instance, all Canadian public servants are subject to a rigorous values and ethics code. And most relevant for today's conversation, obviously, is the question of the Conflict of Interest Act, an act that plays an important role in reinforcing that culture of integrity. And the work of your committee also plays an important part in that. Because fundamentally, this is about Parliament ensuring that the Conflict of Interest Act is effective in upholding the transparency and accountability that contributes to Canadian democracy. Now, with respect to the Prime Minister's blind trust and the screen, like every other public office holder since 2007, the Prime Minister is subject to requirements under the Conflict of Interest Act. In addition, the Prime Minister and the Ethics Commissioner have agreed to and published a public declaration on agreed compliance measures, which includes the screen and the blind trust. And as you've heard already from the Ethics Commissioner, the blind trust and the screen are in place to promote transparency and public confidence in decision-making. In Canada, I think we're all pretty familiar with those screens. They've been in place for many years in the public and private institutions and under governments of varying political stripes. It's also, I think, worth remembering here that the Conflict of Interest Act and tools like the screen are in place to enable government to attract people with diverse backgrounds, including from the private sector, while very much ensuring the integrity of decision-making. So how does it work? We've put in place a rigorous process to implement the screen, and that has been fully validated by the Ethics Commissioner. First step, policy decisions that might trigger the screen are identified and reported to senior management of departments and agencies as they arise. Then departments and the Privy Council office conduct a very robust case-by-case due diligence. At that point, if there appears to be even a remote possibility that the screen may be needed, it is immediately put in place. Why? So that we always err on the side of caution. And to ensure those principles underlying the screen are consistently applied, we've developed a comprehensive assessment tool that provides a framework to assist in the analysis, and I'm happy to table that tool with you as members of the committee today. Government officials receive rigorous training across the public service, especially in the most relevant departments. Both the assessment tool and the training materials have been thoroughly reviewed and validated with the Ethics Commissioner. So following the work in departments and following work in the Privy Council office, the Deputy Secretary Governance at PCO then makes a recommendation on the screen's application. As an administrator of the screen, I review that recommendation and take a decision. All the advice, as you know, from the public service on the full range of issues for the Prime Minister comes through the Clerk of the Privy Council. That perspective, that is something that gives me a broad perspective, and that broad perspective is critical in my role as an administrator, and I would like to say I regard that role as an administrator as a duty, a very important duty. And then finally, decisions are shared with the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, the second administrator, for concurrence and immediate implementation. Bien que la loi sur les conflits d'intérêts ne demande pas.
The Conflict of Interest Act does not require disclosing how the screen is applied. I can, however, I would like to share as much information as possible with committee members and Canadians. There are 13 files on which we needed to decide whether or not to apply the screen. Every one of those 13 files, without exception, was
Translator's a bit quiet.
confirmed by the Ethics Commissioner. In 7 files, the screen was not applicable according to the principles in the assessment tool that was also validated by the Ethics Commissioner. 5 did not have any direct interaction with businesses, and 2 had to do with general application tax measures. And so that's 7 files. In 6 files, the screen did apply. For those files, the Ethics Commissioner was clear. The Prime Minister cannot be aware of a file before a decision is made and it is confirmed and made public. If not, it would undermine the goal of the screen. And that was the case with 4 of 6 files in which the screen applied. 2 of those files are now public, and a final decision was made. I am certain that you will have questions on these files, and I would be pleased to speak to them. And to summarize, Chair, we created a system that we find very rigorous. It is applied very carefully. The public service is very aware of its responsibility to ensure the integrity of our institution and of the Prime Minister's office. I would now be pleased to hear your questions and to hear your recommendations later on. Thank you, Chair.
This guy looks like he's ready for the Senate.
Merci, Monsieur Sabia.
Thank you, Mr. Sabia.
We begin. I just want to make sure, again, for the sake of the interpreters, that we're not talking over each other, to let the question be asked and the answer be given. And I understand, Mr. Sabia, that you also said that you have the assessment tool. I think I have that in front of me, and that you would like that distributed now to the members of the committee.
Happy to do so.
We'll do that. So we are going to start with our 6-minute rounds, and Mr. Barrett is going to begin. Go ahead, Mr. Barrett, please.
On what date did the ethics screen for the Prime Minister come into force?
Mr. Barrett, there really are 2 stages in this process. The screen that is in place now, the result of pretty exhaustive work on the part of the Ethics Commissioner with respect to the disclosure provided by the Prime Minister, that screen was put in place, I believe, on July the 10th. Prior to that, on an interim basis, a somewhat simplified screen was in place from very shortly after the Prime Minister became Prime Minister and until the more fully elaborated screen came into place on July 10.
Are you able to articulate, perhaps in writing to the committee, unless you're able to do it now, the differences between the initial screen that followed, in your words, very shortly after the Prime Minister assumed the role?
Yeah, the principal change between the two, and it's, I think, pretty logical. After the disclosure of the Prime Minister to the Ethics Commissioner, that provided the Ethics Commissioner with a full overview of the assets of the Prime Minister. That enabled the Ethics Commissioner to develop a list of 103 companies. And that list is published on the site of the Ethics Commissioner. So the principal difference between the two, there were some minor differences, but the principal difference between the two is the screen that's in place now contains the 103 companies that are the result of the Prime Minister's disclosure. Prior to that, it was primarily focused around Brookfield and Brookfield companies because the Prime Minister, while having made disclosure, the Ethics Commissioner hadn't completed their work on it. So that's the principal difference between the first and second.
How will Prime Minister Carney's planned cuts to the public service affect the units responsible for the conflict of interest screening as it's
Those reductions will not affect this.
So there's documents that show that machinery of government secretariat vetted the guest list for the Prime Minister's London and New York meetings. Would the vetting process be compromised or the structure of it changed in any way by these cuts?
No, Mr. Barrett, let's back up a bit. The government has priorities, as you know. One of those priorities is the prudent and rigorous application of this screen. So as we go about the task of continuing to right-size the public service for the future, clearly one of our jobs, one of our responsibilities is to ensure that those priorities of the government are always able to be implemented. This being one of those priorities, we will ensure that the workforce, that the people who are responsible for the operation of the screen, et cetera, that they continue to be able to discharge their responsibilities fully.
So, in a word, any reductions
As
to
you'll find, it's hard for me to give you a word.
any reductions to machinery of government or the team that is currently being used to implement the screen, that team will not be affected by any cuts?
Well, the answer to it is we will continue to administer the screen fully, prudently. There will be no compromise or impact on the ability of the public service to operate the screen now,
but
during,
the size
or
of the
after
team,
the reductions.
if I may, sir, the size of the team may change?
But this is my point. It doesn't, to be direct, it doesn't really work that way. So can I explain?
Well, I have very limited time. I've got a little less than a minute left.
Well, I'll give you the 30-second answer then.
I'll give you 15 if I could, sir.
Okay, well, the way this works is it's embedded across the public service. It's embedded in the principal departments where there is responsibility for the sectors in which the screen is most likely to be applied. So that involves a highly decentralized system, which, yes, at the end of the day is overseen by the Privy Council office and at the end of the day by myself. But it's a mistake to think that there's just a small dedicated group of people working on this. This is something like other priorities of the government that reach into departments.
You sold your Brookfield, your controlled assets, shares in Brookfield to avoid conflicts. Shouldn't the Prime Minister, shouldn't a Prime Minister do the same to prevent influencing decisions that will have the direct benefit to their financial interests?
Well, I think you you partially correctly and partially incorrectly characterize my thinking around my decision to dispose of my my investment in Brookfield. First off, as a matter of record, my assets have been in blind trust pretty much since 2009 when I started working at La Caisse de dépôt et placement du Québec for good and reasonable
Mr.
reasons.
Sabia, we may have to get back to this. I have to give other equal
come
time. I have to give equal time to each member of the committee. Sorry, Mr. Barrett, Mr. Sabia.
Makes you feel any better. My
Madame
answers will be
Lapointe,
equally long for everybody.
Madame Lapointe, vous avez la parole pour 6
Ms.
minutes.
Lapointe, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair Mr. Sabia. Welcome. Welcome to the Ethics Committee. We're pleased to have you here with us today. Thank you for speaking with us today. In your role as Clerk of the Privy Council, can you tell us more about your role?
You don't know what the Privy Council does?
What do you do?
What do you
Le rôle du greffier du Conseil
The
privé,
role of the Clerk of the
Le rôle-
Privy Council includes
Can you imagine
2 to
being an
3
MP
things.
and you don't know what the Privy Council does?
Oh my gosh.
I am responsible for the public service as a whole, first and foremost. Secondly, I am also a secretary at cabinet, and this role requires a lot of work with cabinet members and members of the executive. And I work under the Prime Minister. And so I work on developing the public service to better prepare it for the future because things need to change, and we know that things are changing throughout the world extremely quickly. I also work closely with ministers to ensure that the government functions well and to ensure collaboration. For the Prime Minister, I act as someone who gives counsel, and I prepare advice, and I advise the Prime Minister. Thank you very much. You might not know, but I was an MP from 2015 to 2019, and between the two, I worked for the Prime Minister's office, and I found it quite interesting for you to share what your role is and what the role of your team is. In your opening remarks, you talked about being an administrator for the Prime Minister's Ethics Committee. Can you share more about that role? As I was saying to Mr. Barrett earlier, we now have mechanisms in government to identify a potential conflict of interest. As administrator, and of course, I work with the team at the Privy Council office and with other deputy ministers to identify any potential conflicts of interest. And so I make decisions regarding the use of the screen in order to protect the Prime Minister and also to protect the institution of the Prime Minister's office. I protect that institution against a potential conflict of interest. Thank you. You also made reference to the role that you share with Mark Carney Blanchard, who is Chief of Staff, who is also an administrator of the screen. Can you explain the difference between your role and that of Mr. Blanchard? There are 2 things to note here. I am responsible for the public service, and one of the responsibilities is to share our professional advice to the government we give advice directly to the Prime Minister. That is thanks to the work done by the public service. On the other hand, we have the political offices of government. I'm an administrator for the public service and provide advice, and Mr. Blanchard is responsible similarly, but for the political sphere. And so it is the combination of both of our roles that brings together the public service and political office. And with my role and with Mr. Blanchard's role, we have a more global perspective of government activities, and that is essential in order to detect a potential conflict of interest. I have another question, and if you don't have time to answer it, we can come back to it later with my colleagues. You have 20 seconds. Can you explain to the committee how the Privy Council office and the Prime Minister's office work to ensure compliance with this screen? My answer has two parts. We have different responsibilities, so we don't have to negotiate. Mr. Sabia, I think that we'll have to come back to this answer later so that all members of the committee have equal time. And apologies, Mr. Sabia. And thank you, Ms. Lapointe. Mr. Theriault, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Mr. Sabia. On November 3rd, you made your declaration of conflict of interest. You sold your assets for Brookfield. Why? When I learned that I was investing in Brookfield, that was in the process that I was going through with the ethics commissioner in his office, because all of my assets had been in a blind trust and had been there for years. It was on September 24th, the commissioner's office told me, and with other investments that were shared, I saw that I had investments in Brookfield. And so my response was clear. I quickly decided to sell that. Those shares, because as an administrator, it was simpler, it was more practical to not invest in Brookfield, given the Prime Minister's position and given that my role is to protect the Prime Minister and his institution against the perception of a conflict of interest. I decided to sell because it was simpler.
Okay, you've said that already.
That's great, Mr. Sabia. And so you were aware that there could be a potential conflict of interest, or at least the appearance of a conflict of interest. It wasn't a conflict of interest, and it was simpler to avoid that appearance. When did you sell your assets? I made that decision. I'm not sure exactly. I think it was 30 minutes after seeing that Brookfield was on the list. With C5, which was adopted very quickly, it has to do with economic development strategies, and Brookfield would be impacted, for example, because it has railway lines and natural gas treatment facilities, oil sands, and is present in ports. These are all areas that will be impacted by C5. And Brookfield has assets in all those areas. Is that why you sold your assets? Because it would have been simpler to manage the situation? No. I decided to sell because I wanted to better play my role as an administrator for the institution and for the Prime Minister. It was not linked to C5 or anything like that. But you can agree that there's the problem of the appearance of a conflict of interest. Because of the role played by the Prime Minister and Brookfield's assets, and with the government's economic plans. If not, you wouldn't have sold. One moment, I just want to finish my question, please. If the Ethics Commissioner raised that or flagged it and requested a screen, that means that there was a potential appearance of a conflict of interest. I'll say it again. I decided to sell because there is a screen that protects the Prime Minister. And at the Commissioner's request, I did not have to submit a screen. I knew that the Prime Minister had investments in some of Brookfield's activities, and so to better manage the screen, I chose to sell my shares. So it's not a matter of a conflict of interest. It was just to simplify things. Simplifying things, what does that mean? Simplifying things because you wanted to be able to apply the screen that was required? What are you simplifying then? It was clear, given the role that the Prime Minister played in Brookfield, and it was clear that Brookfield would be an important part of my activities as an administrator. And so to simplify those activities, because it was clear that Brookfield would be at the heart of many of my decisions. And so, in order to simplify those decisions, I decided that it would be simpler to sell. Thank you, Mr. Sabia. Thank you, Mr. Thériault. We're going to move on to our second round of questions. Mr. Cooper, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Sabia. The Brookfield Global Transition Fund 1 is subject of the Prime Minister's ethics screen. Mr. Carney's disclosure states that he is entitled to carried interest payments from the Brookfield Global Transition Fund, essentially future bonus pay based upon the performance of the fund. What Mr. Carney's disclosure does not provide for are the holdings within that fund. Are you aware of what those holdings are as the administrator of the ethics screen?
No, I am not.
Is the Ethics Commissioner, to your knowledge,
Yes.
aware? He is aware of those. But you are responsible for administering the screen, not the Ethics Commissioner. So how is it possible for you to make a determination as to whether the screen applies if you are unaware of what those holdings are?
The operation of the screen is such that with the 103 companies that we have identified a number of sectors that fund is operating in certain of those sectors. And when issues of that kind arise, where then the...
But Mr. Sabia, here's the situation with respect to that fund. Mr. Carney set up that fund. He registered it in the Cayman Islands. It's a multi-billion-dollar so-called clean energy fund. He picked the companies. He knows what the holdings are. He knows what public policy decisions might influence the fund's success and therefore his future bonus pay. So again, how can you determine whether the screen is appropriately triggered if you're ignorant to what is behind the fund?
Yeah, Mr. Cooper, for the simple reason that we check everything with the Ethics Commissioner.
And so you would do what? Explain how what you would do with that.
So when an issue arose, if we had...
How would you know an issue arose?
Because...
You don't know. If you're blind to what is in the fund.
Because, as I said, we have identified a series of sectors, and we judge our activities, we guide our activities, partly based on those sectors, partly based on more specific information with respect to the operation of individual companies in the list of the 103. Where we would have any question or uncertainty, we confirm all of that with the Ethics Commissioner. So we have the benefit of...
But I'm not asking about the 103 companies.
No, you are.
Asking specifically
no, Mr.
about
Cooper,
this
that's not
particular
true.
fund.
That's not true. You started your
Well,
question
how is it
by...
not true?
Mr. Cooper, you started your question by saying that that fund is on the list of the 103 companies.
It is,
Okay.
and I asked you then.
And so, and what
were
I'm
you aware
answering
of the
for you,
holdings
I'm going to
behind
need you.
that
I'm
fund?
going to need one at a time
and
here.
you answered in the negative, and I followed by asking you whether the Ethics Commissioner was aware of the holdings within the fund, to which you answered in the affirmative. And I asked you, as the administrator of the fund, of the screen, how it's possible for you to administer it when you don't have that information.
well, now that we're playing replay, I'll just say what I said before, which is, and one of the reasons why collaboration between us and the Ethics Commissioner is important is that the Ethics Commissioner has access to a full range of information, and we check everything
Well,
with them.
as the administrator of the fund, shouldn't you be privy to the full range of information? Why is it that you have only some of the information?
Well,
It doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't you just, if the Ethics Commissioner supposedly has a list of the holdings, then why wouldn't you ask for a list of the holdings?
because given our collaboration with the Ethics Commissioner, certainly in my view, it's not necessary. If there's any ambiguity...
It's not necessary if the Prime Minister stands to make tens of millions of dollars in future bonus pay, and you don't think it's
No, Mr.
necessary
Cooper,
to just have a list of the holdings?
No, Mr. Cooper. I think that is not the case. I think that's clearly not the case.
What's clearly not the case?
Mr. Cooper, as I said in my opening remarks, the moment we believe there is the potential for a conflict, a screen goes up.
Okay, we're going to have to come back to this. Ms. Church, 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Clerk. And thank you for setting the stage for us today here at the committee by impressing on all of us the deep-rooted culture of integrity that Canada has shown its commitment to, and to what you've described as a rigorous process fully validated by the Ethics Commissioner, which I think satisfies many of the questions that we've had as a committee as we've looked into this act. My question to you might be to start a little bit about the difference between the respective responsibilities of the public service versus the political arm of government when it comes to conflict of interest compliance. Could you describe those two sides of the process?
Ms. Church, I think that they're in many ways very similar. We do our work within the public service, clearly and obviously on a nonpartisan basis. we review these issues through individual departments, through our work in the Privy Council office. But as you know very well, there is another aspect of government, which is the operation of political offices. And there's quite a bit of business that has transpired. I'm thinking in particular here about the setting up of meetings, the management of schedules. And there can be a case where a political office would be in the process of establishing a meeting with, in this case, the Prime Minister or the Minister of Finance or another minister, and that they will have that information. And therefore, it's why it's important to have the two levels, these two aspects of government, both the public service side and the political side, doing their own work, because we each have our own, sometimes joint, but sometimes separate responsibilities. And it's also why it is important for us, which we do, to share the information that we have, that they share the information that they have, because the more information you have, the better you can make judgments.
Mm-hmm. And then, as I understand it from your testimony, the Ethics Commissioner's Office is also available to both sides of the equation.
Well, more than available. I would say that the Office of the Ethics Commissioner is not just available. The Office of the Ethics Commissioner is an integral part of the process. Mm-hmm. Integral in that the definition, the structure of the screen that was put in place, the nature of the blind trust that was put in place, those were essentially at the demand of the Ethics Commissioner. They were structured by the Ethics Commissioner and his office. Step one. Then step two is in the day-to-day operation of the screen. We collaborate fully. It's almost, I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's almost a tripartite operation of the screen between the public service, the political level of government through the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, and the Ethics Commissioner. Because, again, that kind of collaboration, as I was saying to Mr. Cooper, is a better way of maximizing information.
Mm-hmm. And probably to keep tabs on any changing information as well, and ensure that any changes in information.
Yes, of course, yes.
Clerk, from a machinery of government perspective, how common is it for the Office of the Ethics Commissioner to be working directly with the Prime Minister's office or other offices to establish compliance mechanisms like conflict of interest screen? You've
well, I think it's
touched on this in your opening remarks, but maybe just for
yeah, I think it's very common and it's very appropriate. The Ethics Commissioner is by nature a different entity, because the Ethics Commissioner and that office, they are officers of Parliament. We are part of the government, part of the executive branch of the government. And parliamentary oversight of issues like conflict, accountability, other things, that's fundamental to how our democratic system works. So having the Ethics Commissioner involved both in structuring these for the Prime Minister, for other ministers, for other public office holders, as the Ethics Commissioner does, is the right thing to do, because, in effect, as an officer of Parliament, he is accountable to Parliament and accountable to the judgment of all of you as elected parliamentarians, which is,
Thank you,
in
Mr.
terms of
Sabia.
accountability and transparency,
Mr. Sabia, we're over
it's
time.
the right thing to do.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Church.
Thank you, Clerk.
Monsieur Thériault, je vais vous donner 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
During the leadership race, Mr. Carney shared a vision that you have in C5. That was Mr. Carney's project with C5, correct? Yes. If we're looking at making things simpler, would it not have been simpler for Mr. Carney to do like you and sell his holdings in Brookfield?
Yeah.
This is a question that we've been asking ourselves at the committee because we need to look to review the legislation. Should that be a requirement?
Yes, it should. 100%.
Having different requirements for the Prime Minister? There needs to be the highest level of transparency and accountability. The Prime Minister, well, if a minister has to leave the room, the Prime Minister can manage that. But who manages that for the Prime Minister? It's you and the Chief of Staff. But should he have done like you? That is where the screen comes into play. We'll come back to that. So your answer is no, because there's a screen. That is my answer, yes. Okay, we're moving. Slowly. I would like to ask a question. Do you know what is in a blind trust? I understand the disclosure made by the Prime Minister that has been shared on the Commissioner's website. Do you interact with the trustee? No, not at all. And so you don't know how things fluctuate, what changes in the trust, and so you are, in fact, blind in some of the advice that you can give to the Prime Minister. How could you properly apply the screen if you are not aware of the content of that blind trust? I understand your question. The Commissioner made a decision in July in creating or during the creation of that blind trust and the application of the screen. He made a decision regarding the disclosure of the screen. At that time, the Prime Minister was aware of what was in the disclosure, so that there was the potential appearance of an apparent conflict of interest. No, he was aware of the disclosure, but if the trustee, I believe that's the word, trustee, fiduciaire in French? Perfect. If the trustee decided to sell something, well, the Prime Minister is not aware of that. So the possibility of a conflict disappears. But in your role as Clerk of Privy Council, you need to work with the different departments and organizations, but you also must give advice and support ministers in making decisions and the Prime Minister in making political decisions. And if you don't know what the content is, can you truly apply the ethics screen in an optimal manner? Yes, I can. The Ethics Commissioner came to us and said that he was not interested in being responsible for the oversight of the ethics screen. He's aware of the content, but he was not willing to do the oversight because he would be judge of all of that. How many times did you reach out to the Commissioner in the recent months? And how many times did you ask him, according to what he knows of the content of Apologies,
Come on,
Mr.
let him answer
Thériault,
this.
your time is up.
Let him answer the question.
This is such a fascinating topic, Chair. I think that
We may go over a second. I don't need anybody yelling in my ear that it's time, okay? I'm keeping time. Monsieur Hardy, 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Tell Ms. Church.
Thank you, Chair. The wrong microphone is on.
C'est de s'assurer qu'est-ce qu'on met en place pour les Canadiens.
The interpreter cannot hear. The wrong microphone is on.
Ah, c'est beau, on peut avoir confiance. Je vais juste... Try again, OK. Désolé, le micro marchait pas. On va recommencer.
Apologies, my microphone was not on, so I'll start over. For those who are listening to us, because Canadians and Quebecers are listening, you stated in your opening remarks that democracy is under pressure. At the Ethics Committee here, we want to ensure that people can trust their institutions. I read a report by Mr. Hannaford, who testified in previous weeks, and so did the previous clerk of the Privy Council, and he mentioned that there needs to be continuous efforts to regain the public's trust, but it can be lost very quickly because of a lack of ethics, because of a conflict of interest, as we saw in many different sectors. Even a perceived violation is enough to undermine the public's trust. Would you agree with that statement? I believe that he's referring to the quality of service to Canadians. Well, there were a lot of things in the report, but he also refers to people's trust in their institutions and the responsibility that the administration and politicians have in order to make decisions that are in the public's interest. We were talking about an improvement in the quality of service to Canadians, but the statement that I read, do you agree that we have a responsibility as politicians and as government to ensure that people can trust our institution? Yes. In a time of crisis and when democracy is under pressure, there are two things that are important: transparency and really overdoing it, really trying to be above reproach. When you arrived in your position, you made the decision very quickly, in 15 minutes, to sell your assets with Brookfield because you saw that it would have an impact on your work and you wanted to be sure to be above reproach and not influenced by anything that could undermine your work. Do you believe that the Prime Minister should have done the same thing in order to avoid potential issues and avoid potential issues for his staff and overcorrect, as I mentioned? He could say, yes, I know that I come from the public sector. I know that private sector. I know that I've made a lot of money, but now I will be working for the country. I will set that aside and work for the interests of the country. I have two comments. Firstly, and I'll say it again, that's why we have the screen. That is why we use the screen, in order to protect the Prime Minister's institution against a potential conflict of interest. Secondly, in life, as you know, there's always the matter of trying to strike a balance. So yes, we have a screen to protect Canadians' trust, and that's extremely important, of course. But also, we need to have a system that works. We need for people who are coming to government from the private sector or elsewhere, and we need to find a balance between that responsibility that's extremely important, but also our ability as a country and as a government to encourage talented people to come to the public service and strengthen the government of Canada. So we need to strike a balance between both sides. We are seeing an enormous pressure on democracy, and we need to overcorrect. So finding a balance is one thing, but Mr. Warnick, your predecessor, stated here that politics is a short time frame often for people. The Prime Minister stated that if not for the crisis, he wouldn't be here. He was here to solve a crisis. That's what he said. So he has a heavily financially based background. He's here responding to a crisis, and he's putting himself and putting Canadians in a place where they doubt their institutions. Just a quick response, please. I gave him a little bit more time because his microphone wasn't on initially. In 10 seconds or less, please, Mr. Sabia. That's not possible. But do you agree with me? I would simply state that delivering for Canadians is an important part in maintaining their trust. And to strengthen their trust, we need to have a government that can deliver on the important things and lead the country through a crisis. Mr. Saini, you have 5 minutes.
Mr. Sabia,
Oh, no, not Grandpa.
can you walk the committee through how a compliance screen fits the broader integrity framework of the Federal Public Service and the Conflict of Interest Act?
Can you just repeat that for me?
Can you walk the committee through how a compliance screen fits within the broad integrity framework of the Federal Public Service and the Conflict of Interest Act?
Sure. So the process is basically, as you know, there are two big elements to this. The first is
Don't worry about that up
the creation of a blind trust, such that any assets are in a trust run by others, where decisions are made by others, and the public office holder, myself included, has no ability to see inside that trust or to make any decisions with respect to it. So that's the first step, and that's obviously pretty important because if you don't have knowledge and if you're not making decisions, that helps deal with circumstances of the real or potential conflict of interest, number one. Number two, in this case, there's another layer, which is a screen on top of that to further respond to points that have been raised with respect to the confidence of Canadians and transparency and accountability. So given the decision-making role, the obvious decision-making role of the Prime Minister, layering on a screen on top of that protects against another potential risk, which is an individual may not know exactly what is in that trust, does not make decisions with respect to it, but they still might have some knowledge of particular types of assets. The screen protects against that. And the screen says other third parties, myself, Mr. Blanchard, the Ethics Commissioner, have a role in ensuring that issues that could arise are that the Prime Minister is protected against those circumstances and that those decisions are taken by other ministers. So that there's two layers of protection here, the blind trust and the screen, and in conjunction, and the two working together, I think creates a pretty solid basis for ensuring that the Prime Minister's integrity and the office of the Prime Minister is seen to be one of high integrity.
Thank you. Can I ask you to speak to the safeguards that are in place to ensure that the conflict of interest compliance mechanisms are followed consistently across the government?
Yeah, so you've seen and we've distributed an assessment tool that is distributed across the government. In addition to the distribution and the development of an assessment tool, again, in cooperation with the commissioner, is an extensive process of training so that individuals across the public service system have the same tool and the same training with respect to the operation of that assessment tool. So that is an important element of how we build sensitivity across the public service system, not just in the Privy Council office and not just in the office of the Prime Minister, but across the public service system and indeed across the system of political offices in departments across the system. So our effort here is, in effect, to have everyone on the same page, thinking the same way, looking for the same things, and raising the same flags. And then those eventually percolate up into the Privy Council office or up into the office of the Prime Minister, where eventually the two administrators, myself and the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, take decisions as to whether or not the screen should be imposed. But I do want to reiterate something, and this is important, that from the moment a flag is raised, a screen's imposed. Now, it could be that when that issue comes to me or to Mr. Blanchard, or perhaps to the Deputy Secretary of Governance of the Privy Council office, we would say, well, wait a minute, it actually doesn't make sense. And yes, it was good to do that in an abundance of caution, but in fact, there's no need for a screen. That is conceivable. That has not happened,
Thank you,
but
Mr. Sabia.
that is conceivable. So, that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stop talking.
42 seconds over and nobody's yelling in my ear that we're over time. I'm shocked. We're going to reset the clock to the top of the hour. Mr. Majumdar, you have 6 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Sabia, you had mentioned earlier that you divested your assets, your Brookfield assets, because it's simpler. You wanted to avoid the appearance, and you made the decision 15 to 30 minutes after you saw Brookfield appear on the conflict screen on the list itself. What does it say that the Prime Minister did not apply the same judgment that you did?
Here we go again. I think there are two different circumstances here. My job is to operate the screen and to make judgments with respect to when the screen ought to be applied. When the screen is applied, the Prime Minister is not included in the decision making, and the screen applies every time there is an issue that could be put to the Prime Minister that could come to the benefit of the companies listed on the list of 103 companies.
Right.
Not
So
could,
you're
it does.
Because of that,
you're screening, if you might. It's my time. You're essentially saying that you are removing yourself from being conflicted as an administrator of the screen because the Prime Minister is conflicted.
no, I don't think I'm saying that. What I think I'm saying is that to protect the Prime Minister and the institution of the office of the Prime Minister, my role is to make final decisions on whether or not a screen applies or not. For me not to have divested of that, I think would have raised questions in my own mind about can I actually function in that role.
Okay, so let me ask it a different approach here. One of the items on the screen is the BGTF, which holds the Brookfield Global Transition Fund. They hold specific portfolio assets. At no point is a screen invoked on those assets as a conflict for what the Prime Minister is incented by. The Prime Minister is incented by performance of the fund and its portfolio. Do departments across the government that work in this process have an access to the portfolio components of BGTF?
Again, I come back to my answer to Mr. Cooper on that. This is not about trying to track the various bits and pieces of what may or may not be in a fund. This is about understanding that the fund operates in a certain domain, and by operating in that domain, that causes us to raise flags when we need to.
So, in the broad areas of what that fund operates in, the Prime Minister is engaged in very serious discussions that affect the future of the country. He is incented by knowing what's in that fund and what his performance pay would be based on that fund. How is it possible that he's engaging those industries without the screen being invoked?
But the screen would be invoked.
Based on what's the component assets of the BGTF?
Based on the sectors of operation. And if we needed to, we would dig deeper and we would go, as I said, to the Ethics Commissioner, and we would get the information that was required if we needed it. But bear in mind one thing. We always err on the side of use the screen more broadly rather than narrowly. So we always err on the side of an abundance of caution, always.
However, there has not been an abundance of caution because the portfolio components of BGTF, which are specifically articulated as part of the screen, are not being screened by the departments.
The sectors that that fund would operate in are cause for a screen to be imposed. And if there's any doubt or question about it, I'm repeating myself, I apologize, but we have access to the Ethics Commissioner and we use it.
Has the department or have you asked the Ethics Commissioner to understand what the components are of the BGTF?
We have not needed to up to now because anytime there was a perception of it, we put up a screen and that's been borne out by the Ethics Commissioner. It's been validated by the Ethics Commissioner.
So it comes back to the question that I had originally, is that there are so many areas in which the Prime Minister is conflicted based on his holdings. And you had made decisions to uphold the integrity of the office. But the Prime Minister has not made the same decisions to uphold the integrity of his office. How do you justify that scenario? I ask this because across the institutional investment world, there are very strict screens, whether it's the CDPQ, Brookfield, the Bank of Canada, on how investments are intended to be structured and if any individual investment team member is associated with it. The private sector from where you came from has higher standards than what I see displayed in the tool and in the screen than the Government of Canada. How do you justify that?
Well, so here's my answer to that. I ran what is now a $500 billion investment fund.
You're going to have to be quick, Mr. Sabia.
Well, I ran a $500 billion investment fund for 11 years. It was $375 billion when I left. And we had lots of screens and ways of protecting against conflict of interest. We were able to do that successfully without any incident over the period of time that I was there, over those period of 11 years. I would say that the operation of the screen here in the Government of Canada for the Prime Minister is every bit as rigorous as any screen I have seen in the private sector pretty much ever.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Majumdar. Mr. Sabia, I failed to ask as we moved into the second hour, are you okay? We're on a roll. Do you need a break at all, or are you good?
It doesn't sort of feel like a roll.
Well, I mean, it is kind of a roll. People are asking questions. You're answering them. Do you need a break, sir?
Not right away, but
Okay.
can I keep the option open?
For minus 15 minutes before we're over? No.
No, seriously, can I keep the option open? Because if not, I'll take it
If
down.
you need it, then just let me know.
Okay.
Monsieur Sarré, pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît. Go ahead.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Sari, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Sabia, for being with us today. You covered many things that were quite interesting, and you clarified a lot of things. But before I ask my question, and you mentioned it in your opening remarks, you talked about democracy, not only in Canada, but throughout the world, and that democracies are fragile right now. And with social media and polarization of issues, things are very fragile. And as elected officials, we need to be very careful to what we say. We often hear comments stating that the screen hides information or that it hinders accountability. As clerk of the Privy Council, can you clarify what the screen truly does and what it does not do? Our system on a global scale, and it's thanks to a conservative government, in fact, and that was the government that implemented the act. And I believe that it was a good thing, because when we look at democracies throughout the world and we look at requirements that we have in our legislation and our Conflict of Interest Act, it's among the best legislations. I believe that Canadians should be proud that, according to the OECD, in a survey that was carried out and an analysis of the 30 members of the OECD and the quality of our democracy, we are number 4 out of 30. And Freedom House, which is independent from government, stated that the quality of our democracy in Canada is number 1 of G7 countries. And globally, we're 5th. And I believe that we should be proud of that. We should be proud to be Canadians given that context. As you stated, democracy is under pressure, but Canada remains a strong democracy, and I believe that Canadians should be proud of that. To come back to my question, can you simplify for those who are listening to us? What does the screen do? What does it not do, if you can be brief? The screen is a way to ensure that the Prime Minister or another minister, that person would not have access to a decision that could lead to a conflict of interest. So it means finding a way, it's a way to exclude a person, the Prime Minister or a minister, so to exclude them from something that they are responsible for making a decision on. And in a case where there could be private interest. If there were to be an issue regarding the screen, are those issues shared with departments, those who manage it? Is the process hidden in any way? Do you believe that the process is appropriate? I believe that it is. That is why I stated at the beginning, and I named the 13 files, and we can't speak about some of them, but I believe that we are comfortable being transparent and we can share the facts regarding the different circumstances. I believe that such a level of transparency will strengthen everyone's trust in our system because our system works. Now, let's talk about the impartiality of public servants. This includes systems that ensure compliance, like the screen. Are these screens used throughout government, or are there areas where it's not used? No, it is used throughout the government. Throughout the government. With all departments. Yes. Thank you. Mr. Thériault, you have 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Sabia, since the beginning of your mandate, how many times did you have to ask the Prime Minister to recuse himself? 10 times. One moment. I just want to clarify. It was not a request. It was a decision that I made with Mr. Blanchard to impose the screen. We did not ask the Prime Minister. So you imposed that. You told the Prime Minister to recuse himself 6 times. I'm not sure what your question was. What were those decisions that he needed to recuse himself from? Or do you have that information? And perhaps you can respond to my other question in looking for that information. I can respond to your first question. Go ahead. There were 6 times that we had to apply the screen. I want to know what the topic was. I'm getting there. It's because I don't have a lot of time, Mr. Sabia. Well, it's a bit complicated. So there are 6 cases, and in 4 of those, the process is ongoing, so I can't tell you the topics. But in 2 other cases, the government decided to make that decision. And the circumstances were a little bit complex, but briefly, in one case, it was for adjustments to our tax system in a cross-border circumstance. So certain adjustments, and so we decided in that case that it would be possible that companies on the list, there were about 100, could benefit from that change, and so we imposed the use of the screen. In another circumstance, it was a minor change to our tax system, and so we did the same thing to ensure that the Prime Minister would not participate in that decision. Could you share that information with the committee, what the topics were? In C15, for the budget that was tabled yesterday, there were tax credits for small nuclear facilities that will help. And there are only 5, and that includes Brookfield, who owns Westinghouse. Was the Prime Minister a part of that decision, or did you tell him he needed to recuse himself? For those tax credits, it was an important... So the answer is no. Give me a second. My answer is...
Yes or no, man? Yes or no?
That these changes would impact various organizations, and you're trying to say that it's a political decision with a general application. And so you don't believe that when a political decision has a general scope, well, there won't be a potential conflict of interest or an appearance of one. But when do we go from public interest to private interest? There are many globally. But I'm talking about C15 and...
Yeah, this is specific, man.
...small nuclear reactors and sites. There are 5. And Westinghouse is a part of those 5. So you can say it's of general interest, but there are so few companies that would be impacted. So when do we go from general interest to private interest? Do you not think that there could be a conflict of interest, even if it's a general application? The tax credit applies more generally and goes beyond the nuclear sector. The tax credit
It still applies to that sector,
to
though.
different companies that work on renewables. And there are many. But there are tax credits in C15 for these small nuclear reactors. No. We'll be looking into that. Go ahead. And will you send an erratum to the committee? The tax credit, yes, includes nuclear, but in such a limited sector. So you didn't ask the Prime Minister to recuse himself? No. Because there's a vast array of companies. So is there something that would disproportionately benefit a company? And in this case, the answer was no. So even if Brookfield owns Westinghouse, it's not enough for you.
Yeah. What the
Not a
hell?
big deal. I just want to understand the reasoning. I think it's an issue. But what you're saying to me, and it's fine that you responded the way you did, but you were saying earlier, as soon as there's doubt, you apply the screen. I'm eager to see what the two cases are. Apologies, Mr. Thériault. Perhaps we can come back to that. I went over time, Chair? About 15, 20 seconds.
Oh, come on, let him answer the
I
question.
apologize.
Oh, shit.
I also
He's on a good line of
apologize.
questioning.
But your time is up. Mr. Barrett, 5 minutes.
Barrett.
5 minutes, Mr. Barrett. It's all the same. Go ahead.
I'm going to try and get through a couple of topics quickly, if I could, with you. I'm hoping that you could undertake to provide in writing to the committee for the period between the spring and now how many discussions, decisions, or votes were flagged under the screen. Provide the details of each occurrence. Are you able to provide that to the committee in writing?
Your question is from when to when?
From when the screen existed until today.
I just did. It's 13.
Are you the details of those, the reasons for the screen being invoked?
Well, in some cases the screen was invoked. In other cases the screen was not invoked.
Could you provide the details of why it was invoked, or what and why the review was triggered?
I can.
Okay.
But there are 4 circumstances that are still underway, and in those circumstances, if we release that information, then we've defeated the purpose of the screen because the Prime Minister would be aware of what those circumstances are. So other than those, can we give you this? Absolutely.
Would you be able to do it within a week from today?
Yep.
Wonderful.
Subject to my caveat about the 4.
Thank you. Are you able to tell us, in writing, who is responsible for assisting yourself and the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister in administering or enforcing the screen?
Sure.
This is information that would generally be available through access to information requests. Not looking for any personal information about the individuals. Just who's pushing the buttons and pulling the levers. Would you be able to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I can.
Thank you.
They're more or less here.
Okay. Thank
At
you.
least the senior ones in the Privy Council office, if you want those. But we're happy to give you those. In
Okay.
writing.
And again, by this time next week would be okay?
No problem.
Terrific. Now, would you be open to regularly providing public details of the instances where the screen is triggered, and as much public detail or as much detail as could be made public? I appreciate that it's not required under the Act, but I think that based on your willingness to discuss some of it today, you appreciate how it can enhance public confidence in this process.
Yeah, I think we can try to do that within reason, as long as I don't have to come back here and do it all the time.
Well, I think that if we got the information proactively, we wouldn't need to send the invites. Though you're welcome to join us for coffee down here anytime, sir. I have 2 more questions with 2 minutes left. If the first one is a rehash, I'm wondering if you can take 1 minute to tell me, if you don't have the complete list of all of the investments, of all of Brookfield's investments, how you can guarantee that you're screening all the conflicts, because you don't ask the Ethics Commissioner in every instance.
We do ask the Ethics Commissioner.
So, but not with everything that comes across the Prime Minister's desk.
Anything that comes across in the relevant sectors where, after examination of the file, we think that there's a possibility, then we do.
Okay, so artificial intelligence, modular construction, heat pumps, home retrofits, many of the things around the Prime Minister's housing plan, his future payments from things like the Global Transition Fund, which, though his controlled assets are in a blind trust, those payments are going to happen anyway, so he's not blind to those. Any decision that he takes affecting any of those things that I just listed, some of these things he's made announcements about, including on housing and artificial intelligence.
Yes, but draw a distinction, Mr. Barrett. Just saying that the Government of Canada wants to build modular homes, or the Government of Canada is interested in building a mass timber industrial capability in Canada, or whatever. Announcing a priority is not the same thing, and it's very different from the Prime Minister being involved in the specific allocation of government support or government contracting to a specific enterprise. That's where the conflict arises, and in those circumstances, if there was a risk or a possibility that that would be happening with one of the companies on the list, then the Prime Minister would be screened out and not able to participate in that decision with respect to the allocation of federal funding or support or whatever to that specific enterprise. He would be screened out.
Or sector.
But you can't allocate government support to just a sector. It ends up going to individual entities, individual companies. And when you get down to the project basis as opposed to strategy and priorities, strategy and priorities is one thing. Specific allocation to projects is another.
Thank you, Mr. Sabia. Thank you.
I don't think Canadians would
Madame
perceive it
Lapointe,
that way.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Sabia. Thank you for all the clarifications that you've given us. It is really helpful to us in our study. So, again, thank you for your detailed responses. Can you confirm to the committee that decisions regarding the interpretation of a screen is made by the Ethics Commissioner? How does it work? Is it important to implement this screen with the Ethics Commissioner? If I understood you correctly, yes, it is very important to apply this screen and to work closely with the Commissioner. How does it work? When would you reach out to him?
I hate this. They just keep giving her the rounds.
Suggested this cooperation. He's always available. And so he and the Prime Minister's office have the ability and the right to verify things with the Commissioner. And we ensure that the Commissioner is comfortable with our decisions. Up until now, in the 13 cases that I referred to, he was always comfortable with our decisions. Up until now, there hasn't been any disagreement. Thank you. Can you share if the Privy Council office plays a role in deciding when the screen is used?
Yes. He
Yes,
said that
it is
already.
the Prime Minister's office.
Go back to sleep.
And I'm repeating myself a little bit here because it's not only the Prime Minister's office, there's also about a dozen departments throughout the government apparatus that play a role, a significant role, in the process. So, yes, these departments have their activities shared with the PCO, but we want to ensure that Canadians can see the transparency at government. And to do that, we need collaboration throughout government. And that is our strategy. Thank you. The public service gives advice to politicians and administer these screens. So it's the Prime Minister's office, Privy Council, and public servants that help politicians. So the public service, does it give advice to political staff regarding the application of the screen? I don't think that describes it well. We work cooperatively. It's not that we make recommendations to the Prime Minister's office. We make our own decisions. And the Prime Minister's office, Mr. Blanchard, makes his own decisions. So there are two things here. For decisions, both are independent. These decisions are made with information that comes from good collaboration. We work to maximize our ability to understand the circumstances, but we make independent decisions. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Lapointe. Thank you, Mr. Sabia. Mr. Thériault, you have 5 minutes.
Mr. Thériault.
Thank you, Chair.
He's been on fire.
We'll come back to that credit. The government decided to include these in nuclear reactors for clean energy, but we can come back to that. Yes, but the credit applies for a lot of people.
Doesn't matter.
But you included these small nuclear reactors, and there's only 5 companies, including Brookfield.
Exactly.
Mr. Carney appointed you, correct? Yes.
Oh, here we go.
And he can also demote or depose you. Perhaps it'll be soon, who knows? And being a subordinate, do you find that that makes it difficult to apply the ethics screen?
Yes, it does.
No, not at all.
That's bullshit.
Great, short answers. And so, would it not be better for the screen to be managed by a commissioner or somebody who works for the ethics commissioner? I've understood that you ask questions and what's the frequency that you have to share reports with the ethics commissioner? Do you have any accountability to the ethics commissioner? there's a constant collaboration daily. That's not what I'm talking about. In applying the screen, is there an obligation for you to report to the Commissioner's office? But that's not necessary because we work together and there's a constant collaboration and complete transparency. There's complete transparency. Yeah, explain that. Explain yourself. We share information transparently regarding our activities. We share all of that with the Commissioner. I don't see a way to be even more transparent than what we are.
You don't see a single way.
When the Commissioner came and we asked him regarding the application of the screen, whether or not there should be an objective accountability and a requirement for administrators of the screen through the Commissioner to report back, and he said that he couldn't do that because he would be both judge and jury. Would it not be simpler for you that there be someone who looks into your decisions? You ask the Commissioner whether or not you're on the right track, but there might be things that fall through the cracks. It's possible. But that's why we have our process and our independent process, but we do work in close collaboration. And I work with Mr. Blanchard, and we have close collaboration with the Commissioner. Thanks to the collaboration between the three parties that I mentioned, the risk of error is very low. But that said, the Commissioner is not a part of your decisions. He gives advice. Mr. Thériault, we are responsible for managing the current system as best we can. Yes, I understand that. We understand that. I don't have a lot of time, so we understand that. But we need to review the Act, and we need to see whether or not it requires additional rules for the Prime Minister in order to ensure accountability regarding decisions made with the screen. You said that there are 2 cases, and we don't know the topics of those. And so, transparency is necessary. There needs more transparency. Thank you. Mr. Sabia, the time's up. Mr. Hardy, you have 5 minutes. Let's carry on the structure. The Ethics Commissioner said to us that when a decision was of general interest for the public, there was no conflict of interest. If I've understood correctly, he's aware of what is in the Brookfield Fund. If he finds that it's of general interest, he won't raise a red flag. And when you reach out to him, you won't be chatting about a potential problem in that case. In such a circumstance, for something that applies generally, through its definition, in fact, it's not something that could lead to benefits for a specific company. So I do agree. But if I know what's in the fund, as Mr. Carney knew 6 months ago, well, then one would have an idea in leaving the position as Prime Minister that he would have an understanding of the impact on his personal interests. That's why there was no issue apparently in him meeting with Brookfield in New York. I'm going to be repeating myself, Mr. Hardy. Our role is to apply the rules as best we can. For general application measures, they are a fundamental part of the current system. I agree that you're acting in good faith, and you show that in selling off your assets, but you're saying with the current rules, and what we want to look at is whether or not we need to improve them and make things even more transparent and ensure that there's not somebody who is benefiting themselves. Should the rules be revised? Mr. Hardy. My answer is that it's up to you to decide. That's why you're here. That's why you're looking into how the current legislation functions. It is not up to me to tell you to make specific changes. I need to find the best ways to manage the system as it stands. So, with the current system, and you have an impressive background, is it normal that there are employees of a leader and that they are those who are going to be applying screen, or have you seen that at Bell, or employees that need to manage the potential conflicts of interest for their boss? Is that something that can be seen anywhere else in a company or at a bank? Mr. Hardy, honestly, I'm not sure, but you were a CEO. You were the highest position of Bell, Hydro-Québec. You were the prime minister, basically, for those organizations. Were your employees the ones who had to tell you or to ensure that you don't make any missteps? It was never external. Never external. Sometimes it was the board, but it was never external. In my experience, in my limited experience. They're not limited. You've got quite a lot of experience. So the time that you spend in a week to ensure that there isn't a conflict, what does that represent for you in a week? We're looking at 103 companies, including Brookfield, that represents about $1 trillion. How many times do you ensure that there are no pitfalls for the Prime Minister? You can respond to both questions. We have a team at PCO. And as I mentioned, we have teams throughout the government apparatus. I cannot give you a number, but we have a team at PCO that is solely focused on that task. For most of those people, it is not a full-time job, but close. Apologies, Mr. Hardy, your time is up. Thank you, Mr. Sabia. Ms. Church.
Well, Mr. Sabia, maybe to pick up on my colleague opposite's line of thinking, I think members have been focused on this question of reporting responsibility. And what I think is very interesting about what you've brought forward to the committee today is the notion that this is actually less about individuals and more about a process. That were you to fall out of favor with the Prime Minister and he were to replace the clerk, there would be a new clerk on whose shoulders this responsibility would fall. And so actually it's the process that sustains the foundation of this conflict of interest regime across government. Is that a fair representation?
Oh, that is a completely fair depiction of how this works. It shouldn't be. Mm-hmm. To function well, it shouldn't be based on an individual. In fact, my responsibility is to ensure that there is a process rooted in the breadth of the public service that's in place. Mm-hmm. So when I think about my role as an administrator of this screen, my interpretation of that is create a rigorous process and make sure that it functions well. Mm-hmm. So that this is not rooted in the office of the clerk, it is rooted in the breadth of the public service. Mm-hmm. And the breadth of the public service, we in the public service provide nonpartisan, and I'm happy to say from time to time fearless advice to the political leadership of the government. And that's as it should be, because that's our job. And the reason why it's important that this is rooted across the elements of the public service is to ensure that that fearless advice, that nonpartisan advice that rises to the level, in some instances, of the Prime Minister, that's how you get this screen to function properly. Mm-hmm. And it's not based on my judgments as an individual. It's based on a process's judgment. Mm-hmm. And it's much deeper than what any individual can bring to it.
Well, and maybe to that effect, at the beginning of this meeting today, you tabled about a 10-page document here, the assessment tool on the application of the Prime Minister's conflict of interest screen, which is distributed across the public service, I think you mentioned. Within this, it sets out an analytical framework for how to investigate, how to decide on the different matters that may be coming forward in the Prime Minister's office. I guess maybe I would almost hand it to you to say, is there anything in the document here that you would point us to, to maybe address some of the concerns that you've heard about what constitutes a general application or a broad class?
Look, I think in reading this document, honestly, I think this document speaks for itself with respect to the care with which these issues of a conflict of interest screen are being managed. As you'll notice, this is pretty highly detailed. It provides a sequence of decisions that individuals need to take. This is not just, oh, gee, gosh, you got something going on there in real estate? Mm-hmm. It's not that. It's a structured list of ask yourself this question first. If yes, do this. If no, do the other. So I think a fair-minded person reading this document would read it and go, this is a serious effort to structure a comprehensive process across the public service that assures that this screen functions well and, I think, functions efficiently. So, to me, the reason why I wanted to table the document, and Ms. Church, thank you for raising it, is I think it speaks to, and I think your committee should have the benefit of seeing how it is we are actually going about this work. Mm-hmm. Because the almost paint-by-numbers approach, do A, do B, do C, do D, here speaks to how serious and careful we are being in the operation of this screen, because we as public servants understand this question about the importance of the confidence of Canadians, and especially, if I can just give me a minute on this, especially now in the country's history. This is a particular moment. The only reason I'm in this chair is because the Prime Minister asked me to take on this job, and I took it because Canada's at a particular moment.
Because
and
your buddy asked you.
Where Canadians need to have confidence in their government.
Thank you, Mr.
This is
Sabia.
about providing that kind of confidence to Canadians.
Mr. Cooper, for 5 minutes, go ahead.
Yeah, Cooper, go on, buddy.
Mr. Sabia, I want to make sure I understood your answer to a question posed by Mr. Majumder, in which you, as I understood you said that the ethical standards that apply within the Government of Canada, and specifically to this Prime Minister, are more robust than those standards that apply in the case of the institutional investment world. Did I get that right?
I would say they're as good or better.
As good or better. So I want to ask you, in follow-up to a question that Mr. Hardy asked you, which you didn't give a direct answer. It's very straightforward, and that is, where in the institutional world is there a situation, is there an example where a subordinate screens their direct boss for conflicts of interest? Just an example, please.
Well, I think you mischaracterize the relationships between, for instance, in this case, the head of the public service and the prime minister. The public service in Canada.
Mr. Sabia, you're a subordinate of the prime minister. You serve at his pleasure. He brought you in from the outside. You were not within the civil service. You were effectively a political appointment.
Well, wait a second. I do not regard myself as a political appointment.
Well,
you're entitled to your own conclusions,
you just
Mr. Cooper.
You just said before I opened my round that you're serving because
Mr. Cooper, the point
Mr. Carney asked you.
But Mr. Cooper,
Carney asked you, and he could fire you, couldn't he?
And I look forward to whenever that happens. But Mr. Cooper,
you made an assertion. You made an assertion
Point of
that
order.
the ethical standard is higher as it applies to this prime minister, and I just asked you.
Well, I said
give me an
it's
example.
I said it's at least
of
as
where
good.
a subordinate.
So I'm intervening here for the interpreters. We've got to go back and forth. Let's answer the question, ask the question.
So let me answer the question.
Go ahead, Mr.
I love
Sabia.
how he's ignoring the point of order.
Mr. Cooper, you continue to make an error. This is not about me as an individual. This is about the engagement of the breadth of the public service in the administration of this screen. Those are two entirely different things.
Mr. Sabia, you sign off ultimately on whether the ethics screen is invoked or if it's not.
But
the buck stops with you.
Yes, but that is the result of extensive work across the public service by a set of engaged public servants acting in the public interest.
But you ultimately make the decision,
so
and you answer to the prime minister.
It is not the same thing.
It is.
Two more minutes.
So, again, you haven't provided an example, and therefore I would submit your assertion that the standard, that it is more robust, simply doesn't hold water. And I want to ask you about the involvement of the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. Clearly a political appointee, clearly someone who answers and serves at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. He also signs off on the invocation of the ethics screen. So when you make a decision, because as I understand you first make a decision, then what role precisely does the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff play with respect to that decision? Because as I see it, on the form that you've provided, it also requires his signature. Do I have that right?
Well, we are both administrators of the Prime Minister's screen.
Jointly?
Yes.
And so, for example, if you made a decision, as you put it, and you then passed that decision on to the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, and he disagreed with that decision, what would happen in that case?
I think in that circumstance, which has not arisen, I think in that circumstance, the only viable course, if he and I disagreed about the application of a screen, would be to go to the Ethics Commissioner and say, make a decision, and that we will abide by whatever your decision is.
And that hasn't happened, as you said.
That has not occurred.
But that's not part of the process. That's just something that you would do as a matter of practice, so you say.
That would be the logical way to handle a situation of that kind, to go to an officer of Parliament and to say, we disagree, you make a decision, and we'll abide by it.
But otherwise, there would be no involvement of the Ethics Commissioner.
No, as I said on several occasions, the ethics commissioner and his
said
staff
you
is
sometimes
include-
consult the ethics commissioner, but ultimately, when you make a decision,
Hey, I'm going to have to finish it there. Monsieur Sarret, pour 5 minutes, s'il
Oh
vous plaît.
man,
Mr. Sahi, you have 5 minutes.
he was just
Thank
cooking.
you, Chair. I would like to thank our guests. Thank you for your patience. I would
Here
like
comes
to
some
give you the
bootlicking.
opportunity. Earlier, you talked about the independence between Mr. Blanchard and the public servants. Can you speak more to that independent process? In decision-making in government, there's always two aspects. Public service on the one hand, and we're responsible for our own analyses and for developing our advice for government, sometimes with the Prime Minister or with other ministers. That's part of our tasks. But on the other hand, there's a parallel process with the activities in the public service. We look at the government's public interests and the Prime Minister's office and ministers' offices, and they are responsible for that side. In government decision-making, both sides come together with a political and public service perspective, and it's with both those independent perspectives that make up government decision-making. And it's the same thing with managing the screen. There are two sides, public service and political office. Earlier, in speaking with Mr. Cooper, you were interrupted in responding. If you could expand on what you were trying to say to Mr. Cooper. Can you remind me what the question was?
Oh.
Mr. Cooper was asking a question regarding conflict of interest. It was the first part of his question. I don't remember what I was saying to Mr. Cooper. Apologies.
You don't
I'll go
remember
to
what you were
another
saying
question
3
then.
minutes ago?
Did you receive training or support or assistance when you arrived in your new role? Training or support on the screens? I would say yes. There were many discussions with the commissioner on the screen and how it works and how it applies to the Prime Minister. We also had discussions with the team, with the commissioner's team, on my activities, and through those discussions, I believe that I developed knowledge on the nature of the work. When I was at the Department of Finance, I worked with similar circumstances. So through discussing things with the commissioner and through my previous experience at finance, I think I understand how it works. And what about, and I remember Mr. Cooper's question regarding being a subordinate and having to apply the screen. Before I accepted my appointment, I said to the Prime Minister that I would always be candid in sharing my advice. And I'm sure that there will be times where you will disagree with me, but I will not change my point of view, because my role is to give you the best advice possible. And so for me to say to the Prime Minister that I need to apply a screen, even though he might not agree, well, this brings me to my last question. Have you ever had a case where the Prime Minister questioned your decisions? Many times. Thank you, Mr. Sari. We're going to end with Mr. Thériault, who has 2 minutes and 30 seconds. 2.5 minutes. I'll see if I can get through it. The Ethics Commissioner wants us to include the appearance of a conflict of interest and that there should be a red flag raised. This morning, Radio-Canada stated that for the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, the Gulf region is seen as a partner that could be as significant as some Asian countries. Brookfield announced launching a global project in AI, and they will be partnering with Indivia as clerk of the Privy Council. Do you think that that's a coincidence, an unfortunate coincidence? Do you believe that the average Canadian could see promoting that region? And again, Brookfield is making an announcement. There must be talks. You don't think that there's an appearance of a conflict of interest there for the average Canadian? No? No conflict of interest. No appearance. The Prime Minister didn't do as you did, Mr. Sabia. He did not divest. And now he's promoting a region, and on that same day, he's promoting Canada. Yeah, he's promoting Canada, but at the same time, he's promoting a business that will be having activities in a region. Well, it's Singapore, the Middle East. The Prime Minister is trying to promote Canada because we need investment.
And he's
That's
not
at the
doing
heart
shit.
of the future of the country. Does the Prime Minister keep contact with Brookfield? How many times has he communicated with them since becoming Prime Minister? I would say that the answer is no. In your view, you're saying you don't think so, but is it possible? Have you examined that possibility? Do you say to Mr. Carney that he cannot speak with Brookfield? He is very aware. And did you say that to him? Because earlier you said that you imposed the screen. Will you impose to him that he can no longer speak with Brookfield? It wouldn't be necessary for me to do so. In discussing things with the Ethics Commissioner a few months ago, the Commissioner told him just that. And for that matter of the Middle East and Singapore, we regularly examine his schedule, who he'll be meeting with. Is there a potential conflict? So we have a rigorous process, and we look at his agenda to ensure that there is no conflict. Thank you, Mr. Thériault.
Question for you. And I've been keeping notes of some of your testimony throughout the course of these 2 hours. One of the comments that you make is that you work within how the current legislation functions. And herein lies the problem, sir, and that is, as it relates to the general application rule, the Conflict of Interest Act is so open to that you can actually drive a truck through it in terms of that general application rule, because you gave examples about how a policy decision is made on the part of the country, and then there are very specific layers that happen as a result of that. The problem is that, we're in a situation right now where some of the witnesses that have come before us have said we've never had a prime minister as conflicted as this. And here's the problem. The problem is that on some of these major policy announcements, Mr. Terrio referred to artificial intelligence, modular homes, heat pumps, small nuclear modular reactors, and, for example, the lumber business. There is, within the Prime Minister's portfolio that's being held, as we all know, in a blind trust, deferred stock units, options, and bonus incentives related to that, notwithstanding the fact that there are stocks within there. And I know you said you're making a serious effort, and the difficulty in that is under the transition fund, there are many, many entities related to that. So my question to you is, for the sake of the confidence that Canadians have in their designated public office holders, whether it's the Prime Minister or the Minister, you mentioned that you divested yourself of Brookfield assets because you did not want that to be perceived, real or otherwise, as a conflict of interest. Do you not believe, sir, that when a person runs for Prime Minister and is that conflicted, should they not divest themselves of all of the assets to ensure that we can have public confidence, restore public confidence, that the person who is holding the highest office in the land is not benefiting from decisions that are being made, whether they're on a general basis, given the policy announcements that have been made, and when you layer it down to the specifics, there is the potential for profit to be made. Do you not believe, sir, that complete divestment is the answer in this case? And I understand there's tax implications, but we're talking about the confidence that Canadians have in the office holder in the highest office of the land. Do you not believe divestment should be the option?
Honestly, Mr. President, I think I come back to something that I said earlier. And to be blunt, I don't think it's that simple.
It is that simple.
I don't think it's that simple because I think, given the issues facing Canada today, this is a time when Canada needs to be able, and it's not just the Prime Minister I'm talking about, I'm thinking about ministers, I'm thinking about other senior people coming into government, where we need access to the best talent that this country can provide.
It's this bullshit excuse again.
I think that's fundamentally important because this country faces a set of challenges, the likes of which we probably haven't faced since the Second World War. That, I think, requires careful judgment about striking a balance between, on the one hand, the very legitimate point you make with respect to confidence and accountability and transparency, which is what the screen is all about, and why we are being so diligent and so careful about that screen, because I endorse 100% the importance of those principles in the eyes of Canadians. On the other hand, we also have to be able to get the best talent that we can because Canada needs it. And therefore, I would urge you, it's your decision. You folks got elected. I didn't get elected. It's for you to decide what that legislation should be. My job, as I've said, is I run the system that exists today. Your job is to say what should it be, and is the system currently, is the current system
You don't need to tell him his job,
adequate?
thank you.
I would just urge you, in thinking that question through, to not create a set of barriers that make it impossible for talented people to come
It's not.
to the aid of the country at a time when we need access to the best talent that we can possibly have. And I can assure you, Mr. President, because I live it, that attracting people into the government of Canada today is not easy. There are many barriers, be it compensation barriers, be it post-employment guidelines, be it X, Y, Z. It is not easy. Now, we work within those rules because those rules are important and we do the best we can. But having access to the best talent that this country has to offer, that seems to me to be, I'll put it this way, an extremely important priority because we got to get this country going and moving forward.
And I would submit to you, sir, that we can draw that talent without the backdrop of whether an individual who is in that office whether it causes Canadians to wonder and causes parliamentarians to wonder whether whether they are personally benefiting from being in the position that they're in.
And that goes, Mr. President, to the rigor with which we run this system. And I can assure you, I mean, if I've done anything
The rigor, Mr. Sabia, comes with complete divestment. It's the only way to deal with this. And I'm
Here.
You know, I don't want to argue with you this point, but Canadians have to have confidence in the person who is running this country that they're not benefiting from it. And if for the reason you say, for the virtuous reason that a person makes to want to run as a designated public officer or the Prime Minister, then that should be part of the backdrop of the decision-making process they make in deciding to run and come back, as you say, to save this country. That should be the number one consideration, in my view, in that decision that they make to come back. That they come back for a virtuous reason, not to profit and not to benefit. And we have to, we as a committee are charged, and I agree with you on this, and we've heard from lots of witnesses who've talked about this loophole within the Act that needs to be challenged and changed. And we are going to have a decision to make. But again, we're not trying to do this for any one individual. We have to do this in order to protect the integrity of the office of the Prime Minister and to ensure Canadians that decisions aren't being made in the best interest of any individual, that it's being made in the best interest of the country.
Well,
so
Mr.
I want to
President,
thank you.
What I would say is I think we both share the view and we share the goal of protecting the integrity of the country and continuing to reinforce the confidence that Canadians have in the institution of the Government of Canada. I don't think there's any disagreement between me or you or other members of the committee that's very important.
And the only way to do that is to change this massive loophole within the law as it relates to the general application rule. So, Mr. Sabia, I want to thank you for the time that you spent with the committee. Thank the committee members. I also want to thank the clerk and the analysts for today. Just a couple of notes that I want to make. Two things. Number one, again, thanking the clerk. The dynamics of trying to add another meeting to our schedule is much more difficult than anyone can think. But tomorrow between 3:30 and 5:30, we've got Mr. Blanchard coming, who is the Chief of Staff for the Prime Minister. There will be a work plan distributed later today, Madam Clerk, maybe first thing tomorrow, on the artificial intelligence study that we're doing. And finally, Mr. Bieber from Brookfield has confirmed that he will be in front of the committee in person next Monday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m.
Okay, but not the CEO.
So that's all I have. I want to thank you again, Mr. Sabia, for being with us today. Thank you to the committee members, analysts, clerks, technicians. Meeting's adjourned.
Okay, so two things. Tomorrow we've got a big day. We've got OGO first thing in the morning, 11 a.m. We've got the PBO coming in after he just released all his reports on the new budget and what he's going to criticize of it or has criticized of it already. 2 p.m. we've got question period. Carney and Pierre will not be there, but it'll still be a decent question period. It'll be the last one for the week, obviously, that we cover. There is one on Friday, but we don't go live on Fridays. You guys know that. And then, as you just heard from John Brassard at 3:30, we've got the PMO coming in, and we're going to get a better line of questioning than from the Privy Council because the PMO is the one actually also signing off on these screens, and we need to hear from them whether or not they're as biased or, if not, more biased than the Privy Council, because the whole idea of that. These two are the ones that are able to sign off on whether a screen gets implemented or not, but they're also appointed by the Prime Minister. That in itself is a conflict of interest. So big day tomorrow. And then also one last thing, as we heard from John Brassard there, is Monday. They did confirm finally that Brookfield is going to be attending, but it's not the CEO. So it looks at what we've had over the past few weeks is basically there's been a back and forth as Parliament did summon the CEO of Brookfield, but he said he's not in the country, doesn't live in the country. He's out for the whole rest of the year, so he won't even be able to come back. Again, that's what remote's for. That's why we Zoom some people, but whatever. So they opted for another director to come in, and I guess the committee has accepted the will of that, and they're bringing in the director who's actually going to be in person as opposed to virtual or anything like that. So Monday will be huge too, because we've been waiting for a long time to hear from Brookfield coming into Parliament. But that's it. We'll leave it here for today. Tomorrow's going to be, like I said, really big. So I'll see you guys tomorrow, first thing, 11 a.m. Just me, Nicole, with the 5 just before we leave there. Thank you so much for the super chat. And you're not the only one, obviously. Raven with the super chat. Just me, Nicole with the 5 gifted. And Goko, I don't know if I ever say your name. I'm just going to call you Donnie because I always say Goko or Gocho. I'm just going to say Donnie. Donnie, man, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 super chats. Okay, so you're banned from super chats for the rest of the week because that was way overly too generous. But I really do appreciate you guys with the extra support on the channel, and just watching is good enough. But anytime you guys feel the need to do that extra support, that really helps. So let's end it here, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. I mean, that was stacked. That was a crazy committee. So it's only going to be even crazier tomorrow, which is great. Anyway, see you guys. Have a good rest of your evening, and cheers.